To Washington now, where President Trump is set to release his proposed budget proposal today. The $4.8 trillion plan highlights his top priorities for the following fiscal year.
The president wants to boost spending for the Pentagon and Homeland Security while cutting Social Security and health care programs. However, Congress must approve the proposal before it can go into effect. So CBS News White House correspondent Ben Tracy is following the very latest from there and is joining us now. Ben, can you just sort of take us through the highlights of the president's budget proposal? Which programs are or would he like to slash, and which ones would he like to really boost in terms of funding?
Certainly, yeah. You know, the White House put out some talking points about this budget, and they're calling this pro-growth, pro-family, pro-American. Of course, these are the things that the president is for, his priority. So let's run through some of the numbers. One area that's going to see some big increases is the defense budget. Military spending is going to go up by 0.3%. That might not sound like a lot, but that means $740 billion in total military spending. NASA is going to get a big boost, about 13–14%. This is in line with the president's focus on the Space Force, which he created this past year. And then there is $2 billion request for more funding for the border wall. That is American taxpayer dollars. That is not Mexico paying for the wall. So the president wants $2 billion more for that. Of course, the other side of this means that there are things that are going to get cut. And right now, the president is calling for major cuts to foreign aid, to the Environmental Protection Agency, and then to some of those social programs that you mentioned. Namely, it looks like it would be Medicaid and food stamps that would get cut, perhaps the most severe.
So, Ben, what's been the reaction from Democrats?
Well, as you can imagine, they're not happy with this at all. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi put out a statement, and let me just read a little bit of that to you. She says, less than a week after promising to protect families' health care in his State of the Union address, the president is now brazenly inflicting savage multi-billion-dollar cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. So that gives you a sense of where these two sides are at. We should put this in context. This is the president's proposal. It is Congress that decides how money is spent and what it is spent on. And the odds in an election year of the White House and Congress coming to any sort of budget agreement seem to be zero. So you can probably expect that we're going to have more something along the lines of continuing resolutions that keep the government funded rather than some grand budget agreement this year.
So, Ben, before we let you go, got to ask you about the president's post-impeachment purge. Enough P's in there for you. He's fired two key witnesses who testified against him, Ambassador Gordon Sondland and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. And he, as we already know, ousted Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch from Ukraine. But what can you tell us about these developments? You know, what was the thought process going into it? Did people try to warn him about this? What do you know?
So Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was basically escorted off White House property on Friday, and we should note that also his twin brother was also relieved of his duties at the National Security Council. And we asked the White House about that this morning. Why was he taken out? And they really have no response besides saying these two, they were not fired. They said, you know, they were on detail here to the National Security Council, so they were simply returned to their home department, which would be the Department of the Army. So that is the official White House line on that. What we have learned, though, is that there were several GOP senators who were urging the White House not to do this, especially when it came to Ambassador Sondland. They said it would be better if he just quietly resigned in a couple of weeks instead of the White House making a big show of basically firing him from his position of EU ambassador. The president ignored that advice. He clearly wanted to make a show of these firings. And, you know, the White House is kind of trying to have it both ways, but the president's been pretty clear, both in his statements on camera and on Twitter, that he wanted this done, that he should not be happy with these people, essentially because they testified against him.
All right, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks.